A good carpenter knows that the most important tool in his workshop isn't the saw or the plane. It's patience. It's the ability to look at a rough piece of timber and see the clean line that lives inside it. You can't rush it. You can't force it. You have to listen. You have to wait for the wood to tell you what it wants to be. For the last 10 years, I'd been living inside a piece of wood that was slowly warping, twisting under a pressure I couldn't see, and I had forgotten how to listen. Then, a surgeon took a saw to my own chest, and in the quiet of the hospital room that followed, I finally heard it, the clean line, the one I needed to cut to save myself. My name is Frank Gable. I'm 72 years old, and for 50 of those years I made things with my hands. Cabinets that closed with a whisper, bookshelves that could hold a man's entire life, staircases that didn't creak. I built things to last. I thought I had built a family that would last, too. That conviction, like a poorly joined piece of furniture, was about to fall apart under the slightest pressure. I was lying in that starched hospital bed, a fresh 6-inch seam down my sternum held together by what felt like staples and stubbornness. The air smelled of antiseptic and something vaguely like boiled laundry. Every breath was a negotiation with the dull fire just beneath my skin. The surgeon, a young man with impossibly steady hands, had called it a textbook triple bypass. He'd rebuilt the plumbing of my heart with the precision I used to reserve for dovetail joints. He'd fixed the muscle. He couldn't do a thing about the spirit. With a grunt, I reached for my phone on the rolling bedside table. The movement sent a jolt of pain through my chest, a sharp reminder of my own fragility. I tapped open the family group chat, a digital room that had grown colder and quieter over the years. The last messages were from a week ago, a generic, "Thinking of you, Dad," from my son Kevin, sent just before I went under the knife. I typed out the simplest of questions, my thumb feeling clumsy and thick. "Doctors are discharging me tomorrow. 11 a.m. Can one of you pick me up?" I stared at the screen, waiting. I wasn't asking for a parade. I was asking for a gesture, a sign that the thing I had spent my life building our family still had a foundation. The little gray bubble with the 3 dots appeared, pulsed like a weak heartbeat, and then delivered the verdict. It was from Kevin. "Bad timing, Dad. Have to take the SUV for detailing. Just Uber." It was the word detailing that did it. Not an emergency, not a sick kid, a car wash. My son was choosing a shiny car over his father with a brand new chest. Before I could even process the sting, a second bubble popped up right below it. Brenda, his wife. "Frank, honestly, you should ask for another week there. Your recovery is the priority, and we've gotten so used to the quiet." I read her words twice. Your recovery is the priority. A sentence that sounded like care but was shaped like a cage. We've gotten so used to the quiet. A door being locked from the other side. My presence, my very existence, was noise, an inconvenience, an interruption to their detailed car and their quiet house. The house I built, the one I gave them. The nurse came in then, a kind woman named Patty, with tired eyes and a smile that had seen too much to be fake. She fluffed my pillow, her movements efficient and gentle. "Your family must be so excited to have you home, Mr. Gable." Her words were a kindness, but they landed like stones. I looked from her hopeful face to the cold screen of my phone. I felt the fresh stitches pull across my chest, a sharp, searing line, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief, the hurt, the years of quiet compromises, they didn't shatter. They settled, they cooled, they hardened into something new. Something solid and true, like a piece of old-growth oak. I finally saw the grain, I saw the warp, and I saw the clean, straight line I had to cut. I took a slow breath, my rebuilt heart beating a steady, calm rhythm beneath the scar. I made a decision, not a loud one, not an angry one, a quiet one. The kind of decision you make when you're measuring a final cut on a piece of wood worth $1,000. You do it with absolute precision, and you don't look back. I smiled at Patty. "Yes," I said, my voice clearer than it had been in years. "They have no idea. You spend a lifetime building, you learn to see the grain in things, not just in wood, in people too, the way their promises run, the knots of their character." Lying there in that hospital bed, with the ghost of my son's words hanging in the sterile air, I had spent years ignoring the grain in my own son, sanding over the rough spots, pretending a cheap veneer was solid oak. Now, with nothing but time and the steady beep of a machine charting my heart, the memories started to rise, not as ghosts, but as evidence. My workshop, It was my sanctuary. It smelled of cedar shavings and linseed oil. Light streamed in through the high windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny spirits. Every tool had its place, hanging on a pegboard I'd laid out with geometric precision. My hands knew them by weight and balance, the same way a musician knows his instrument. My wife, Eleanor, used to say, I was more at home in there than I was in our own living room. She was right. In the workshop, things made sense. Joints were either true or they were not. A line was either straight or it was crooked. There was no room for ambiguity. Kevin never understood that. As a boy, he had no patience for the slow work of creation. I tried to teach him. I remember one summer, we decided to build a small boat, a little dinghy for the lake. He was 12. He was excited for about an hour, fascinated by the steam box we used to bend the ribs. But when it came to the sanding, the endless, repetitive work of smoothing the hull until it felt like silk, he lost interest. This is boring, he'd whine, dropping the sandpaper. Can't we just paint it? He wanted the finished product without the process. He wanted the glory of the launch without the splinters. I finished that boat myself. He used it once. Brenda was different. She wasn't lazy. She was an appraiser. She could walk into a room and instantly calculate the value of everything in it, including the people. She understood the language of quality, not because she appreciated the work, but because she understood the status it conferred. When she and Kevin first started dating, she would tour my house, running her fingers over the built-in mahogany bookcases in the library. Frank, this is incredible work, she'd say, her eyes gleaming. You just can't find this kind of craftsmanship anymore. I was flattered. I was a lonely widower, and I mistook her appraisal for affection. After Eleanor passed, the house was an echo chamber. It was a craftsman bungalow on Elm Street that I'd spent 30 years restoring. Every piece of trim, every mortise and tenon joint in the dining room wainscoting I'd done myself. It was more than a house. It was my autobiography written in oak and maple. It was the last place I still felt Eleanor's presence. Kevin and Brenda saw it differently. They saw it as an asset waiting to be leveraged. Dad, you can't keep this place up, Kevin started, about 6 months after the funeral. He put his arm around me, a gesture that felt both practiced and hollow. Brenda would nod, her face a perfect mask of sympathy. The taxes, the maintenance, it's a burden. We worry about you here all alone. It was a perfectly executed trap, built with the language of love. It was a masterpiece of emotional joinery, every excuse fitting snugly into the next. They proposed their solution with the earnestness of saviors. I would sign the house over to them, a living inheritance, Brenda called it, making it sound modern and sensible. In return, they would convert the spacious, sunlit workshop in the back, my sanctuary, into a small apartment for me. You'll be independent, but we'll be right here if you need anything. She chirped, squeezing my hand. I was lonely. I was grieving. I looked at my son and saw a flicker of the boy I'd tried to teach. I looked at his wife and saw a woman offering the illusion of family. They saw a floor plan with a high resale value. I saw a lifeline. Of course, I agreed. I signed the papers in a lawyer's office that smelled of expensive leather and cheap coffee. I remember the weight of the pen, the scratch of my name on the deed. It felt like a betrayal of Eleanor, but I told myself I was doing it for our son. I was keeping the family and the house together. I moved into my own workshop. They hired contractors who tore out my tool benches and replaced them with a kitchenette that had a 2-burner stove. I listened to them remodel my life away through the thin new walls, the sound of saws and hammers feeling like a mockery of my own life's work. The rent they charged me was, they assured me, just a formality to help with the property taxes. I was no longer the craftsman. I was the tenant. I was just the wood. And they were cutting away, piece by piece, sanding me down, until there was almost nothing left. Lying in that hospital bed, I finally understood. They hadn't just taken a house. They had taken my story and tried to sand my name off of it. The Uber ride from the hospital was silent. The driver, a young man with earbuds grafted to his head, navigated the city with the bored competence of a machine. He probably thought I was just some sad old guy in a worn-out coat, being delivered to the last address I'd ever have. He wasn't wrong about the coat, but he was missing the most important part. I wasn't just sad anymore, I was awake. And the man getting out of the car was not the same one who had collapsed on his workshop floor 2 weeks earlier. That man was gone. This man had a project. My new apartment was a sterile beige box in a senior living complex called Golden Meadows. The name was an insult to both gold and meadows. It smelled like disinfectant and regret. The walls were a pale, sickly yellow, the color of old paper that no one ever bothered to read. The carpet was a thin, industrial gray that felt like felt over concrete. It was the kind of place designed to be forgotten, a waiting room for the inevitable. I had moved in a month before the surgery, after Brenda explained in a saccharine voice that having me on the property was becoming a bit complicated for their insurance. It was a lie so smooth it didn't even leave a seam. I hadn't argued. I was too tired. I sat in the generic armchair that came with the place, the cushions still stiff with the memory of a factory. I stared at the empty walls. In my old house, the walls told my story. There was the faint pencil mark in the kitchen doorway where we'd measured Kevin's height every year until he shot past me. There were the built-in shelves in the living room, groaning happily under the weight of Eleanor's books. Here, the walls were blank. They had no memory, they held no life. They were waiting for me to disappear so they could be wiped clean for the next resident. For an hour, I did nothing. I just sat in the profound silence and let the betrayal settle into my bones. It was a strange feeling. The anger was there, a hot cold deep in my gut, but on the surface there was a profound calm. The calm of a man who has just been given a terrible, clarifying diagnosis. The uncertainty was over. Now, there was only the work ahead. I had spent my life taking rough, chaotic pieces of nature and giving them order, purpose, and clean lines. My life had become a chaotic, warped mess. It was time to put it back on the workbench. Then I picked up the phone. It felt heavier than usual, like a tool I hadn't used in a long time. I didn't call Kevin. I didn't call Brenda. Their numbers felt like poison on the screen. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Sarah Gable, my late sister's girl. Sarah was a paralegal at a small firm downtown. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had Eleanor's eyes that didn't miss a thing. She answered on the second ring. "Uncle Frank," she said, her voice warm with surprise. "I heard about the surgery. Are you okay? I was going to call you this weekend. I'm so sorry I haven't." "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm out," I said. My voice sounded steady. "Good. That was important. Listen, I need your help with something. It's not a big thing. I just need some clarity." "Clarity on what?" Her tone was curious, open. "I need a copy of every document I ever signed related to the house on Elm Street," I said, keeping my voice even. "The deed transfer, the mortgage agreements, the home equity line. Everything. I want to see the grain." There was a distinct pause on her end, a paralegal's pause, the kind where they are rereading the last sentence in their head, looking for the subtext. Sarah knew me. She knew that when I used workshop words for life, something was fundamentally wrong. "Uncle Frank," she said, and I could hear the shift in her voice. It lost its casual warmth and gained a harder, professional edge. It was the voice of a woman who knew how to find a crooked line. "What kind of clarity are we looking for?" I looked around the beige, empty room, at the blank walls that told no story. "The kind," I said, my voice quiet but as solid as a block of maple. "That tells you where to make the first cut." 2 days later, Sarah was sitting at my cheap little kitchen table. She had brought a large, overstuffed accordion file that looked like it had swallowed a law library. Its presence on the flimsy particle board table was a study in contrast, solid, substantial truth sitting on a foundation of temporary pretense. Her face was grim. The fluorescent light of the apartment kitchen, a light I was beginning to hate with a deep and abiding passion, made the documents she pulled out look pale and sick. It was the color of a lie. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet. She tapped a thick sheaf of papers bound by a large clip. "This is the deed transfer. It's a quitclaim deed, filed and recorded 3 years ago. You signed over 100% of the property to them, Uncle Frank. You retained no legal interest, no life estate, nothing. It was very generous." The way she said the word generous made it sound like foolish. She wasn't wrong. Seeing it there, in black and white, the finality of it felt like a punch to my newly repaired sternum. I had given away my life's work for a promise of quiet and the illusion of family. "And this," she said, sliding another document across the table, "is the home equity line of credit you co-signed. I remembered that day. It was for $30,000. Kevin had said it was for a new roof. The shingles are starting to curl, Dad," he he'd said, looking up at the house with a concerned frown that I now realized was pure theater. I'd signed without a second thought. Sarah tapped a column of figures. They opened it for the 30,000, just like you thought. The current balance, as of last week, is $152,421.16. I stared at the number. It didn't seem real. It was just a string of digits, but it felt heavy, like a block of granite. How? I asked, my voice a dry rasp. The limit was 30. I would have had to sign for any increases. Sarah's eyes were hard. She turned the page, revealing a copy of the original loan agreement. She pointed to a dense paragraph of fine print, a thicket of legalese designed to be skimmed, not read. They had you sign a variable agreement, standard practice for these, unfortunately. It allowed them, as the primary account holders, to request credit line increases without a co-signer's signature, as long as you were on the note, and they did, 5 times. She slid another stack of papers toward me. Bank statements. She had highlighted certain transactions, a $70,000 payment to a Land Rover dealership, $12,000 to a travel agency specializing in Caribbean resorts, thousands upon thousands in charges from high-end department stores, restaurants I'd never heard of, a spa in the city. I had been funding their life, one invisible withdrawal at a time. The new kitchen with the granite countertops wasn't for me to enjoy my morning coffee in. It was a monument to my own gullibility. Their vacations, their clothes, the very car Brenda used to drive to the grocery store, I had paid for it all, unknowingly, from the equity of the house I was no longer allowed to live in. But it was the last discovery, the final, exquisitely crafted piece of their deception, that made the blood pound in my ears. Sarah had been methodical. I couldn't figure out why you weren't getting notices from the bank about the increases, she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. Even with the variable agreement, they're required by law to send a notice of any changes to all parties on the loan. So I pulled the correspondence records from the county tax office and subpoenaed the account records from their mortgage company. She turned a single page over and placed it in the center of the table, separate from the rest. It was a change of address form. It redirected all mail addressed to Frank Gable concerning the Elm Street property to a P.O. box in a town 20 miles away, a box I'd never heard of, a place my mail had been going to die. And there, at the bottom, was the signature, a clumsy, amateurish forgery of my own. As a carpenter, I know the language of a line. I know the feel of a confident stroke versus a hesitant one. My signature is a series of quick, decisive marks, born of a lifetime of signing my name to plans and paychecks. This one was different. The pressure of the pen was too even. The loop on the G was too round, too practiced. It was the work of someone trying to draw a name, not write it. It was a cheap fake, an insult. They hadn't just taken my house, they hadn't just drained my equity. They had erased me. They had created a legal black hole where my name used to be, ensuring I would never see the evidence of their betrayal. It was a perfect, silent crime. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were flashing with a fury I knew she got from her mother. "This isn't just bad behavior, Uncle Frank," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "This is mail fraud. It's forgery. This is a crime." I leaned back in my chair and took a long, slow breath, the air rattling in my healing lungs. The beige room didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a staging ground. The plans were on the table. "No," I said softly, my voice devoid of the tremor I felt in my hands. "It's a blueprint." "Oh." After Sarah left that night, the documents remained on my kitchen table like a crime scene. The forged signature seemed to mock me from the page. The long list of withdrawals felt like a catalog of my own foolishness. I didn't sleep. I sat in the beige armchair and watched the moon drag itself across the sky, my mind turning over the details, fitting the pieces together. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my chest. But it wasn't a wild, uncontrolled fire. It was a forge. It was a heat I could use. A craftsman doesn't just stare at a problem. He measures it, he makes a plan, he builds a jig. The next morning I went out, not to a lumber yard but to an office supply store. I walked the aisles with a focus I hadn't felt in years. I bought a large corkboard, the kind that can hold a whole vision. I bought a box of sharp, flat-headed pushpins. I bought 3 different colors of felt-tip pens, black for facts, blue for connections, and red for the lies. I cleared the little dining table that was pressed against the wall of my living room and set up my new workshop. I hung the corkboard on the wall above it, making sure it was perfectly level. A man can't think straight if his workspace is crooked. This beige, soulless room was about to become the most honest place on earth. My project wasn't wood anymore, it was justice. I started with the documents. On the left side of the board, I pinned up copies of the key evidence: the quitclaim deed, the fraudulent change of address form, the initial HELOC agreement. I drew blue lines connecting my real signature on the deed to the clumsy, forged one on the P.O. box form. Then I started on the ledger. I spent 2 full days going through my old bank statements online, my checkbook registers, and the fragile, unreliable ledger of my own memory. With each entry I wrote on a clean sheet of ledger paper, a piece of the past clicked into place. It was a painful process. It was a monument to my own willful blindness, written in black and blue ink. Entry: August 2018. Check number 1432. Payee: Kevin Gable. Memo: down payment assistance. Amount: $40,000. Status: gifted, not loaned. I remembered that conversation. "It's just to get us over the hump, Dad," he'd said. "We'll pay you back as soon as my promotion comes through." The promotion never came. The repayment was never mentioned again. Entry: June 2020. Wire transfer. To Briarwood Day School. For grandchildren's tuition. Amount: $22,500. Status: gifted. Brenda had cried that day. Real tears, I thought at the time. "We just want them to have a better start than we did, Frank," she'd sobbed. A better start, funded by my dwindling end. Entry: March 2022. Co-signed HELOC. Initial draw: $30,000. For roof repair. Note: no roof repair was ever done. New Land Rover appeared in driveway 1 week later. I had asked Kevin about it. "Oh, the roofers found some structural issues." He'd waved his hand dismissively. "We had to push it off. But the old car was a death trap, Dad. This is for the kids' safety." The list grew. It was a history of my own grief being used as a lever. Every time I felt a pang of loneliness, they seemed to sense it and arrive with a fresh invoice for my affection. The numbers didn't lie. Over the past 5 years, I had subsidized their lifestyle to the tune of nearly $250,000, not including the house itself. All while they were methodically cutting me out of my own life, legally and financially, with the precision of surgeons. Sarah came by that Friday evening with a Tupperware of lasagna and a new look in her eye, a look of respect. She stopped dead in the doorway, staring at my wall. The corkboard was now a complex web of dates, figures, and colored lines. It looked like a general's battle map. "I spoke to a friend in the DA's office," she said, her voice full of a new energy. "Off the record, she said forgery and mail fraud involving a senior could attract federal attention. It's serious. We could bring this to them on Monday." I shook my head. I pointed to my meticulous board with a wooden spoon. "I don't want federal attention," I said. "I don't want a prosecution. I want a correction. A courtroom is messy. The outcome is never guaranteed. But this," I tapped the ledger paper, "this is fact. This is a story that tells itself. We're not going to hand our story over to someone else to tell. We are going to build it ourselves, piece by piece, until it is so solid and so true that it cannot be ignored." Sarah looked at my board, at the colored lines, the neat columns. She understood. This wasn't about sending my son to jail. It was about something more fundamental. It was about balancing the books. It was about showing them, and maybe myself, that my life's work had a value they couldn't just sign away in fine print. "Okay, craftsman," she said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "What's the plan? You're the master carpenter. I'm just the apprentice." I tapped the corkboard. "First, we build the foundation. Then, we frame the walls. And then," I said, meeting her eyes, my voice steady and sure, "we raise the roof." A man who works with his hands learns that some jobs are too big to do alone. You can't raise a wall by yourself. You need a crew. You need leverage. Sarah was my crew, but we needed a lever. A long, powerful one that could move something heavy and stuck. "We can file a civil suit," Sarah said that weekend, pointing to the corkboard. "Sue for fraud, conversion, infliction of emotional distress. It would be a fight, but we have the evidence." I shook my head. "A lawsuit is a fistfight in a dark room, sweetheart. It's messy. It takes years. Lawyers get rich, and families get destroyed. I'm not interested in breaking things. I'm interested in building, We're not going to sue them. We're going to expose them. Her eyes lit up. She understood before I even said the name. There was a local investigative reporter, Maria Flores. She had a weekly segment on the evening news called The People's Advocate. She was a force of nature. She went after scummy contractors who put liens on seniors' homes, predatory lenders who hid fees in fine print, and corrupt city officials who thought zoning laws were optional. She was a bulldog, but she was fair. She didn't trade in gossip or innuendo. She traded in facts, documents, and on-the-record statements. I liked that. She was a craftsman in her own way. Her tools were a microphone and a camera, and she used them to build cases that were as solid and unassailable as a well-made cabinet. I didn't call her. A phone call is an interruption. A phone call can be dismissed. An email is a document. An email sits and waits. It requires a decision. I sat at my little kitchen table and composed the message. I wrote it and rewrote it 5 times, sanding the sentences until they were smooth and balanced. I kept it short, professional, and most importantly, anonymous. I wasn't just Frank Gable, the wronged father. I was a source. Subject: a story about asset management. Miss Flores, I am a retired craftsman in this city. I have a story that might interest your viewers. It's not about a single company or a politician. It's about a pattern. It's about how easily a senior citizen's life assets can be mismanaged by those they trust the most. It involves property deeds, forged documents, and the weaponization of fine print. I have the documentation to support every claim. I am not seeking money or revenge in your segment. I am seeking to highlight a problem and arm other people with the information they need to protect themselves. If you are interested in a story about how to protect one's legacy from those who see it only as a ledger, I am willing to talk. On background, for now. Thank you for your time. A concerned carpenter. I read it over one last time, my finger hovering over the send button. This was it. This was the moment the project moved from the privacy of my workshop into the world. It was a jolt, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I had just lit a fuse. I clicked send. 2 hours later, my phone, which had been silent for days, rang with an unknown number. My heart gave a little kick against my ribs. "Am I speaking with the concerned carpenter?" a woman's voice asked. It was crisp, smart, and had no time for nonsense. It was her. "You are," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "You write a very intriguing email, Mr. Carpenter," Maria Flores said. "It has the virtue of being both vague and incredibly specific. My favorite kind. I'm listening." We spoke for an hour. I laid out the facts, just as I had on my corkboard. The deed transfer, the HELOC, the P.O. box, the forged signature. I never used my son's name. I just said, my family, or the new owners of the property. I wasn't a father calling about his son. I was a source providing information on a case study. She was silent for a long time after I finished, and I could hear the faint sound of her typing in the background. "Okay," she said finally. "I hear stories like this every week. Most of them are sad family squabbles that belong on daytime television, but you have a blueprint of the crime. You have a ledger. That's different. That's a story." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "For now, nothing. Let me do some digging on my end. I'm going to look into P.O. box fraud in this county and the notification rules around HELOCs for cosigners. I'll start with a general story, a warning to our viewers. We'll build the foundation, as you might say." I smiled. She understood my language. "And when the time is right," she continued, "if you decide you want to go on the record and put a face to the blueprint, you call me." End clip. "And if I do?" "If you do," she said, and I could hear the steely conviction in her voice, "you'd better be ready to have the whole city listening, because we're not just going to report the news, Mr. Gable. We're going to make it. In woodworking, after you've studied the grain and drawn your plans, you have to make the first cut. It's a moment of truth. On a rough, warped board, that first cut is called the first shave. You use a hand plane to take off a thin, precise layer, creating one perfectly flat, true surface. It's not about shaping the piece yet. It's about establishing a baseline, a single, undeniable reference point of truth from which all other measurements will be taken. After my call with Maria Flores, I knew I had my plans. It was time to make the first shave. The letter was Sarah's idea, but the words were mine. We drafted it together at my kitchen table, the corkboard on the wall, serving as our silent witness. It wasn't an angry letter. Anger is a warped board. It's unreliable. This letter was crafted with the precision of a dovetail joint. It was polite, professional, and as sharp as a freshly honed chisel. Printed on heavy cream-colored bond paper, it was addressed to the senior vice president of loss prevention at the corporate headquarters of their bank. We sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. The green slip on the envelope was a small flag, a declaration that this was no longer a conversation. This was documentation. The letter was simple. It stated that I, Frank Gable, a co-signer on home equity line of credit account number 743B, had recently become aware of significant irregularities and potential fraudulent activity. It formally requested, per my rights as a legally obligated party to the loan, an immediate and unconditional freeze on the account pending a full audit. We requested a complete history of all withdrawals, transfers, and most importantly, all credit line increases made in the past 5 years. The second page was a notarized affidavit. On it, I swore under penalty of perjury that the signature on the attached change of address form, a copy of which we included, was not mine. It was a forgery. We respectfully pointed out that the bank's failure to notify me of the 5 credit line increases was a direct result of this fraudulent document, which they had accepted without verification. We sent it on a Monday, and then we waited. For 3 days, the silence was deafening. I felt a nervous energy, the kind a carpenter gets after a complex glue-up, when all you can do is wait for the clamps to do their work. The call came on Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my beige armchair, reading a book about Japanese joinery, when my phone rang. The screen flashed with Kevin's name. I let it ring 3 times, just to let the silence do its work. Then I answered. His voice was high and tight, stretched thin with a panic he was trying to disguise as righteous anger. "Dad, what the hell did you do?" he barked into the phone. No hello, no preamble. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the air fill my lungs. I imagined myself in my old workshop, a piece of sandpaper in my hand, smoothing a rough edge. "I'm not sure what you mean, Kevin. Is something wrong?" "Is something wrong?" he practically shrieked. Brenda was just at Whole Foods. The whole cart was full organic kale, some kind of expensive cheese. You know how she is. She gets to the checkout, and the card is declined. The credit line card, Dad! She had to leave a cart full of groceries sitting there. She called the bank from the car, and they said there's a fraud alert on the account, and it's been frozen. A fraud alert! She was totally humiliated. Humiliated. That was the word he chose. Not confused, not concerned. Humiliated. His wife had been prevented from buying artisanal cheese with my money, and that was the tragedy. "That does sound embarrassing," I said, my voice perfectly level and calm. "A fraud alert sounds very serious. I'm surprised. Did they say what the alleged fraud was?" There was a sputtering on the other end, a sound like a wet engine trying to turn over. "No, they said they couldn't discuss it with her. It has to be your fault. You must have said something to them after the surgery. Maybe you were confused." "Kevin," I said, and I let my voice get very quiet, the way you do in a workshop when you're about to turn on a powerful saw. It makes people stop and listen. The bank is a financial institution, not a high school. They don't act on confusion, they act on documents. They are legally obligated to investigate any claim of fraud, especially when it involves a senior cosigner who suddenly discovers his signature has been showing up in places he's never been. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I'm sure it will all get cleared up once they look at the paperwork. I could hear Brenda's voice in the background, a furious, muffled squawk. "Ask him about the PO box. Ask him, he knows." "Dad," Kevin said, his voice dropping, the false anger replaced by a very real fear. The bank mentioned a P.O. box and a change of address form. Why would they do that?" "I have no idea," I said, which was technically true. I had no idea why it had taken them so long to notice their own liability. "That sounds like something you and Brenda should discuss, but I'd be happy to talk about it with you both, in person. Bring all your paperwork. I'll show you mine." I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I placed it gently back in its cradle. The silence in the room was absolute. The first shave was complete. I now had a true flat surface. And I knew, with the certainty of a master craftsman, that they were about to measure themselves against it and discover just how crooked they really were. They showed up that evening. They didn't knock. They pounded on the door, a frantic, angry rhythm that was less a request for entry and more a demand for surrender. I was sitting in my armchair, waiting. The corkboard was positioned on the wall opposite the door, the first thing anyone would see upon entering. My workshop was open for business. I let them wait a full minute, long enough for their anger to curdle into uncertainty. Then I opened the door. Brenda pushed past me without a word, her face a storm cloud of fury. She was wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and it seemed to vibrate with her indignation. Kevin followed, looking like a teenager who'd been dragged to the principal's office. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "What is the meaning of this, Frank?" Brenda demanded, whirling to face me. She waved her phone in my face as if it were a court summons. "Humiliating me? Freezing our accounts? What are you trying to do, bankrupt us, after everything we've done for you?" "Everything we've done for you." The words were so audacious, so completely inverted from reality, that I almost laughed. But a craftsman knows when to stay quiet and let the material reveal its own flaws. I closed the door gently and walked over to my corkboard. I didn't turn it around. I just stood beside it. I gestured to the wall. "I'm not trying to do anything," I said calmly, my voice even and low. "I'm just trying to understand the ledger." They stared at the board. I watched their eyes track the documents, the red lines connecting the forgery to the P.O. box, the neat columns of dates and numbers that chronicled their secret spending spree. I watched the color drain from Brenda's face, leaving behind a splotchy, panicked pallor. Kevin just stared, his mouth slightly open, his gaze fixed on the highlighted payment to the Land Rover dealership. He was seeing the blueprint for the first time, and it was the blueprint of a cage they had built for me and for themselves. This is insane," Brenda whispered, but the conviction was gone from her voice. It was the sound of a lie running out of air. "Is it?" I asked. I picked up a long, smooth wooden pointer I'd carved myself from a piece of walnut. It felt good in my hand, solid, true. "Let's look. Here is the deed to my house. Here is my signature, the one I used for 50 years. Here," I tapped the next document, "is the form that sent all my mail, my legal notices, to a secret post office box. And here is a signature that looks a lot like mine, but isn't. The pressure is wrong. The angle is hesitant. It's a poor copy. Can you explain that to me, Brenda?" She flinched as if I'd touched her with a live wire. "It was for convenience. To manage the bills. You were getting older. We didn't want you to be burdened." "Burdened by the truth?" I asked, my voice still quiet. I moved the pointer to the bank statements. "And the home equity line? $150, $2,000. The statement shows a payment to a resort in Cancun, another to a jewelry store downtown. Was that for my convenience too? Was I being unburdened while you were sunbathing?" Kevin finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, we were going to pay it back." It was the excuse of a child, offered up to a man who had spent his life dealing with the hard math of reality. "When?" I asked, turning to face him, to finally make him meet my eyes. "When, Kevin? After the next vacation? After the next car? When there was nothing left to take? A debt isn't a debt if the person you owe it to never knows it exists. That's not a loan. That's theft." They had no answer. They just stood there, trapped in the glare of the truth I had tacked to a piece of cork. All their excuses, all their justifications, they were just sawdust in the face of the ledger. "I want two things," I said, my voice as hard and flat as a workbench. "I am not asking, I am telling you." I walked over to the kitchen table and picked up a document Sarah had prepared. "First, you will sign this. It's a lien agreement. It places a legal claim on the house in my name for the full amount of the equity you've withdrawn, plus interest. You will not sell, refinance, or borrow against that house again without my signature. A real one, this time." "You can't do that," Brenda breathed. "I can," I said, "and I have. This just makes it official. Or we can discuss the forgery with the district attorney. Your choice." She paled. "And second?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Second," I said, looking from her to my son, the boy whose height I had marked on the kitchen wall. "I want you to leave, and do not come back until you have something true to say." They left. The anger was gone, replaced by the cold, heavy shape of fear. They hadn't been confronted by an angry old man throwing a tantrum. They had been confronted by a set of books that didn't balance. And they knew, with dawning, stomach-turning horror, that a full and final audit was coming for them. After the confrontation, a new kind of quiet settled into my beige apartment. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of a workshop after the glue has been set and the clamps have been tightened. All the pieces were in place. Now, I just had to wait for them to cure. Kevin and Brenda signed the lien agreement. They had Sarah deliver it through a courier, a clear sign that they couldn't bear to face either of us. For a week, there was nothing. No angry calls, no pleading texts, just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that seemed to be measuring more than just hours. I knew they were trapped. They couldn't sell the house because of the lien. They couldn't borrow any more money because the account was frozen. They were living on an island of their own making, and the tide was coming in. Then, on a Tuesday night, Maria Flores aired her segment. It was a masterpiece of strategic restraint. It was called Grandma's Signature. She never mentioned my name. She never showed a picture of my house. The segment was a masterfully crafted public service announcement, a warning about the silent epidemic of elder financial abuse happening behind the closed doors of quiet suburban streets. She explained how easily a simple quitclaim deed could transfer a lifetime of equity. She explained the fine print in co-signer agreements that allowed for credit increases without notification. She interviewed a former prosecutor from the district attorney's office who talked about how these cases are often tragically underreported because the victims are too ashamed or heartbroken to press charges against their own family. And then she featured a series of anonymous interviews. Silhouetted figures, their voices digitally altered to protect their identities. The last one was me. My disguised voice, deep and gravelly, spoke over B-roll footage of a quiet, tree-lined street that looked exactly like my old one. An actor's hands were shown carefully sanding a piece of wood in a workshop. They don't do it with a gun, my voice said, calm and measured. They do it with love. They do it with paperwork. They tell you they're taking care of you, but what they're really doing is taking from you. They count on your trust. They count on your grief. They count on you not reading the fine print because your heart hurts too much to focus. Check your mail. Check your signatures. The numbers don't lie. The segment ended with Maria looking directly into the camera, her expression one of serious concern. Do you know someone who might be a victim? A parent, a grandparent, a neighbor who has suddenly gone quiet? Talk to them. Ask the questions. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. Oh, Sarah was with me, watching on my small television. When it was over, she just shook her head, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She didn't land a single punch, Sarah said. She just showed everyone the blueprint of the crime and let them connect the dots themselves. And connect them they did. The next morning, the Maplewood Community Facebook group, a place usually reserved for complaining about leaf blowers and recommending plumbers, lit up. Someone, a young woman I didn't know, posted a link to Maria's segment with the caption, "This is terrifying, a must-watch for anyone with aging parents." The first comment was from my old next-door neighbor, Eleanor's best friend, Mrs. Henderson. Martha Henderson. This story sounds awfully familiar. Remember when our dear Frank Gable had to move out so suddenly last year, and all that expensive construction at his beautiful house right after? I always thought that was strange. A reply appeared almost instantly. Dave Pullman, I'll say. I saw Brenda Gable driving a brand new Land Rover a few months back. Figured they'd come into some money. Good for them, I thought. Maybe not. Then another, from a man I used to play poker with on Thursday nights. Jim Riley. Frank hasn't been at the community workshop in months. I called to check on him after his surgery, and Kevin said he was recovering privately and needed his space. Seemed odd. Hope the guy is okay. It was a slow burn. A dawning realization spreading through the digital backyard fences of our community. No one was accusing anyone of anything, not yet. But they were asking questions. They were looking at the ledger. The pressure wasn't just coming from me anymore. It was coming from the world. Kevin and Brenda were no longer just dealing with their quiet, retired father. They were dealing with the questioning eyes of their friends, their colleagues, their neighbors. The beautiful home they lived in was no longer a symbol of their success. It was becoming a monument to a crime no one could yet name. That week, while the neighborhood was whispering, I was building. Sarah would come by in the evenings with her laptop, and we'd watch the threads on the community Facebook page grow on. The speculation was rampant. People were asking questions, and those questions were creating a wall around Kevin and Brenda, isolating them in their beautiful house that was starting to look more like a prison. They're trapped, Sarah said one night, scrolling through the comments. They can't sell the house because of our lien. They can't borrow any more money. And now, they can't even go to the grocery store without getting sideways glances. You've got them, Uncle Frank. What's the next move? I looked at my corkboard. The red lines marking their lies and deceit were stark and angry. For weeks, I had focused on deconstruction, taking apart their scheme, exposing the shoddy workmanship of their character. But a carpenter isn't a demolition man. My life has been about creating, not destroying. It was time to build something. They still think this is about money, I said, more to myself than to Sarah. They think I'm trying to get the house back or sue them for what they took. Aren't you? She asked gently. I shook my head. That house is tainted now. It's full of ghosts and bad joinery. Eleanor is not in that house anymore. Her memory, her legacy, that's what I need to build a new home for. I explained my idea. It had been forming in my mind for days, a plan as clean and simple as a shaker chair. It wasn't about taking from them. It was about creating something they could never touch. The next morning, I met with a manager at a small local community bank, not the big corporate one that had been so careless with my name. This was a place where the bank manager knew you, a place built on handshakes, not algorithms. I laid out my plan. I wanted to establish a charitable foundation. With Sarah's legal guidance and the bank's help, we filed the paperwork. It was a simple, straightforward legal entity. I named it after my wife, the Eleanor Gable Workshop Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide scholarships and tool grants to young people in our city who wanted to enter the skilled trades. Carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, welding. It was for the kids who, like me, wanted to build things that last, but didn't have the resources to get started. I provided the initial funding myself, with a modest $5,000 check from my own savings. It wasn't about the amount. It was a ceremonial act. It was like laying a cornerstone for a new building. It was a promise. I had created the vessel. I had built the shelf before I had the book to put on it. A week later, the official 501c3 status came through. It was real. It was a place to put a legacy. That same afternoon, my phone rang. It was Brenda. Her voice, once so sharp and confident, was now thin and brittle, like old veneer. "What do you want from us, Frank?" she asked, the words cracking with a desperation that had been simmering for weeks. "Is it money? Is that it? Just name a price. We'll figure it out. Just make this stop." They still didn't understand. They were trapped in their world of transactions, of price tags and payments. They thought the currency was money. They had no idea that the real payment was going to be made in a currency they had long since squandered: respect. "I don't want anything from you, Brenda," I told her truthfully, my voice calm and steady. "I'm not taking anything. I'm just balancing the books." I hung up, leaving her in the silence, with a statement she couldn't possibly comprehend. They couldn't fight an enemy who wasn't trying to defeat them. They were trying to play checkers, and I was in my workshop, building a chessboard they couldn't even see. The foundation was laid. Now, all it needed was the rest of the building. Every year, the Maplewood Community Workshop, the place where I'd volunteered for 20 years, teaching kids how to use a lathe and the difference between a rip cut and a cross cut, held a big fundraiser. It was the social event of the season for our part of town. A silent auction for birdhouses built by local artists, a catered dinner with wine that was a little better than it needed to be, and speeches from local dignitaries who would praise the virtues of working with your hands. It was a celebration of everything I had built my life around. This year, the MC was Maria Flores, and this year, I bought a ticket, just one. I called Maria the day before. "I have the end of your story," I said. She just replied, "The cameras will be ready." When I walked into the event, held in the town's beautifully restored old library, the room buzzed with a warmth that had nothing to do with the heaters. It was the warmth of community. People saw me and their faces lit up. My old poker buddies, my former neighbors, the parents of kids I had mentored years ago, they came up, shook my hand, and clapped me on the shoulder. They didn't say anything about the news story or the whispers on Facebook, but they didn't have to. Their eyes said it all. "We see you, we know, we're on your side." It was a quiet, powerful welcome home. I saw Kevin and Brenda in a far corner, near the bar, standing by themselves. They had to be there. It was a major community event, and their absence would have been a confession. They looked like ghosts. Kevin was staring into a glass of whiskey, swirling the ice with a grim intensity. Brenda was dressed in an expensive black dress, a string of pearls at her throat, but she looked diminished. Her usual bright, brittle confidence was gone, replaced by a tense, hunted look. She kept scanning the room, her eyes flitting from face to face, no doubt searching for judgment. They were isolated, adrift in a sea of people who had once been their friends. They saw me, and Brenda physically recoiled, turning her back to me as if she could make me disappear. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. I spent my time talking to old friends, bidding on a beautifully crafted set of hand-turned wooden bowls, and feeling a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd lost. Halfway through the evening, after the dinner plates had been cleared, Maria Flores took the stage. She was radiant, confident, a master of her craft. She talked about the importance of community, of neighbors helping neighbors, of passing down skills from one generation to the next. She was weaving a narrative, setting a scene. And then she said, "We have a very special guest with us tonight, a man many of you know well, a master craftsman who has given thousands of hours of his time to this very workshop, teaching our children that there is dignity and beauty in making something with your own two hands. He's been through a lot this past year, but he's here with us tonight, stronger than ever. Please give a warm Maplewood welcome to Mr. Frank Gable." The applause was genuine and loud. It washed over me, a wave of acceptance. I walked up the small set of stairs to the stage, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm against the wires in my chest. I wasn't nervous. A man who is telling the truth, a man whose joints are square and whose lines are true, has no reason to be nervous. I stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. I saw my neighbors, their faces smiling up at me. I saw Kevin and Brenda, frozen in a tableau of horror, their worst nightmare unfolding in front of the entire town. And in the back, leaning against a bookshelf, I saw Sarah giving me a small, determined nod. This was it. "Thank you," I started, my voice clear and strong, carrying easily through the silent room. "Thank you, Maria. It's good to be here. This workshop, this place is sacred ground to me. I believe in building things. I believe in honest work. And lately," I paused, letting my eyes sweep the room, "I've come to believe in the importance of honest accounting." "Oh," I saw Maria's cameraman, positioned discreetly off to the side, move in a little closer. The little red light on his camera blinked like a steady heartbeat. I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. The warmth of the community dinner was being replaced by a sharp, electric curiosity. The show was about to begin. "A few months ago," I said, my voice filling the suddenly quiet room, my hands resting lightly on the sides of the wooden podium, "I had to do an audit of my own life, a full accounting. I discovered that some of the assets I had spent a lifetime building had been mismanaged." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd and then died, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I saw Kevin shrink in his chair, his shoulders hunching as if to ward off a physical blow. Brenda was staring at her water glass as if it held the secrets to the universe, her knuckles white where she gripped it. "I had a house," I continued, my voice even and clear, the voice of a man stating a simple, verifiable fact. "A house on Elm Street that I built with my own hands. I gave that house to my son Kevin and his wife Brenda." I paused, letting their names land in the room like stones dropped into a still pond. The ripples spread instantly. I could see it on the faces of my neighbors, the shock, the dawning understanding. I trusted them to be good stewards of that legacy. I trusted them to honor the work and the love that was soaked into its very foundations. They were not. The room was utterly silent now. You could have heard a splinter drop. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights. Through a series of legal and financial maneuvers, including a forged signature on a public document and mail fraud, they leveraged my life's work to fund their lifestyle, all while I was grieving my wife, and all while I was preparing for open-heart surgery. They systematically erased my name from my own life, believing I would never have the strength or the clarity to check the books. I looked directly at their table for the first time that night. Their faces were ashen, they were trapped, pinned by the spotlight of a truth they could no longer escape. They were no longer my son and his wife. They were exhibits A and B. "But this isn't a story about loss," I said, turning my attention back to the wider crowd, to my community. "This is a story about corrections. It's about squaring a joint that has gone crooked. As of this morning, my legal and financial interest in the property on Elm Street has been settled. My claim against the house has been bought out." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a long, cream-colored envelope. I held it up for everyone to see. "This check represents the full value of that interest. It is a significant amount." I let the weight of that statement settle. I could use it. After recent events, I am not a wealthy man, but my wife, Eleanor, always taught me that money is just a tool. It's like a good hammer. You can use it to build, or you can use it to break. The character of the carpenter is in how he chooses to swing it. I walked over to the edge of the stage, to the table where the director of the workshop, a good man named Bill, was sitting with his mouth agape. That's why tonight I am donating this entire amount, $287,000, to establish the Eleanor Gable Workshop Foundation. Music. A powerful, uplifting swell begins, a chorus of strings and piano that feels like a sunrise. The room exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. It was a roar of approval, of a community seeing justice done not in a courtroom, but in a library, in the most public and undeniable way possible. Through the applause, I held up a hand for silence. There was one more thing to build. This foundation, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't expected, the emotion of a legacy reclaimed, will ensure that for years to come, young people in this city who want to work with their hands will have the chance. It will give them the tools and the scholarships they need to learn what I learned in my own workshop, that the most valuable thing you can build is a life of integrity, that you must measure twice and cut once, and that a person's name, their signature, should be the most valuable thing they own. I looked over at Kevin and Brenda's table. It was empty. They were gone, slipped out in the chaos like thieves in the night. It didn't matter. The ledger was balanced. The hammer had fallen, and something new had just been built. I don't live in the beige apartment anymore. I have a small place now, just a block from the workshop, with good light that floods the living room in the afternoon. I have a small workbench set up by the window. It's not as big as my old sanctuary, but it's mine. I spend most of my days there, or at the community center, teaching. The first class of Eleanor Gable scholars started last month. They're a good group of kids, eager, honest. They make a lot of mistakes, but they're not afraid of the work it takes to correct them. Maria Flores won a local Emmy for her series on elder abuse. My story, with the names and key details changed to protect me from any legal blowback, was the centerpiece. She called it the Carpenter's Ledger. I liked that. I never heard from Brenda again. I got a formal letter from a lawyer a month after the fundraiser, informing me that the house on Elm Street was being sold to satisfy the bank and their considerable debts. They moved out of state. I heard from Sarah, who heard it from a cousin, that Kevin took a job at a big box hardware store in a different time zone. He's in the lumber department. I hope, for his sake, he's finally learned how to see the grain. He did call me once, about 6 months ago. The number was blocked, but I knew the hesitant silence on the other end of the line. "Dad," he said, his voice small, thin, stripped of all its old, easy confidence. "I'm here, Kevin," I said. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, the sound of a man wrestling with a sentence he didn't know how to build. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For all of it. For not listening. For not seeing. I'm sorry." It wasn't a perfect apology. It was the apology of a man who was just beginning to understand the cost of the materials he'd wasted. But it was a start. It was the first true thing he'd said to me in a decade. "I know," I said, and we left it at that. Maybe someday he'll learn how to build something again. Sometimes, at the end of the day, I'll sit at my workbench and run my hand over a smooth piece of cherry wood, feeling the perfect, seamless join between two pieces. I think about the clean lines, the honest cuts, the patience it takes to make something true. A family, a house, a life. It's all carpentry, really. You have to be precise. You have to be honest. And you have to have the courage to make the hard cuts when you see that the wood is warped. Because in the end, the only thing you truly own is the integrity of your work. The scene shifts. Frank is in the bright, bustling community workshop. He's standing beside a teenage girl who is nervously holding a handsaw. She is the first recipient of the Eleanor Gable Workshop Scholarship. Frank's hands, calloused and wise, gently guide hers. "Frank, easy now. Don't force it. Let the tool do the work." "Girl, I'm afraid I'll mess up the line." Frank, a small, gentle smile touches his lips. "Then you measure again. There's no shame in that. The shame is in knowing your line is crooked and cutting anyway. Remember the most important rule." "Girl," she smiles, repeating the lesson. "Measure twice, cut once." "Frank, that's the one," he says softly, his eyes full of a quiet, peaceful satisfaction. That's the one. The camera pulls back slowly as Frank and the student continue to work. The sounds of the workshop fill the air, the hum of saws, the tap of hammers, the laughter of young people learning. The final piano notes play, soft and resolved, and the screen fades to black.